You're listening to Creative Leadership with Heart, a podcast that inspires people to take action and be the leader they were born to be. I'm Coach Rico, and I'm known for coaching and training executives, leaders, founders, and high performers at Fortune 100 businesses, startups, and more. I'm here to answer your questions about leadership and personal development while also asking you questions that can unlock your untapped potential. Welcome back to another episode of Creative Leadership with Heart. Today, my wonderful guest, Dr. Carla Engelbrecht. How you doing, Carla?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Yeah, excited. So let me introduce Carla. Carla, we can talk for days. So we'll get through this interview first, and then we'll catch up again. So Carla, she's a creator, product innovator, formerly of Netflix, where we met and spent a lot of time together. Sesame Street, PBS Kids. Now she's the founder of Betweened, which helps support kids in developing mindful and responsible behaviors. But we'll get into more of that later. We'll also talk about navigating the startup world and pivoting and what it takes. So Carla, thanks again for joining us. And let's just get into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey as a creative through this world of technology, entertainment, kids space.
Yeah. It's funny because I think in a lot of ways, it took me a long time to actually call myself a creative, which probably there's a lot to unpack there. But I've spent 25 years building content, product, games, apps, interactive stories, highlights for children, PBS Kids, Netflix, Sesame Street. It's one of these great, fascinating things to be able to say most people under 30 have engaged with something that I've built in their childhood, which is crazy because this has been this like fascinating, wonderful, fun journey. And along the way, picked up a doctorate in education because I wanted to understand better how to do things. And I don't know. How's that for a start? We can go from wherever on there.
I love it. So I love how you say, yeah, I just picked up a doctorate along the way.
Yeah, no big deal.
So tell me first, what about this field? So what was the dream in college for young Carla?
Yeah.
What did you want to do? What was the dream?
Yeah. I mean, if I go even further back, so when I was 8, I used to code in BASIC and was told girls don't do that. I made fortune telling games. I wish I still had what I thought as an 8-year-old was a great fortune to get. And then I sort of meandered, and there was points where I wanted to be a romance writer, where I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I, in high school, started playing bassoon and decided I wanted to be a professional bassoonist, and specifically with the Chicago Symphony. I had a very specific plan here. And I originally went to college for bassoon performance. And if you don't know what the bassoon is a woodwind. It's the one toward the back that looks like a bedpost. And you might know it from like Peter and the Wolf or Sorcerer's Apprentice kind of thing. And quickly realized in the midst of that I was very good. I was at one of the top conservatories, but I was unlikely to ever make a living as a bassoonist. And so then I flipped over to political science and was back to I'll go to law school, and then realized though I really love journalism. And and I'd always been a writer all through this. So whether it was writing fortunes or whatnot. But the particular focus on kids really came my senior year of college. I was shot in the left side of my chest. So I'm a victim of gun violence. From the look on your face and realizing you didn't know this part of my story. I go through periods where I talk about it and I don't always. And it's such a part though of why I do what I do that it is relevant to this conversation. And 17-year-old shot me in the left side of my chest. My rib cage did exactly what it was supposed to do and protected my heart and lungs. So I was okay. But it left me with this question of how does a 17-year-old end up with a gun? And I started talking a lot with kids and really, especially at that point, teenagers, and just kind of talking with them. I was in Rochester, New York at the time, and I was talking with kids in the inner city. And what kept coming through for me as a theme was the television they watched. So at that point, it was like South Park, Jerry Springer, right? Things like that. And I really was dismayed by the quality of television that was available to them, or the quality of media. And so that was when I really decided part of what I wanted to do with my career, or how I could best help, was to help make sure there was great content available for kids. And so that's what led me then to Highlights for Children, to PBS, and then on to this journey. which has largely stayed in the kid space, except for that little diversion off into Black Mirror Bandersnatch, which, is an interesting adventure in and of itself. But that really fuels, even to this day, why I do what I do, is really that mission to create and provide great content offerings for kids.
You could tell by my face, I did not know that. And I've
Yeah.
known you for a long time. That's one of the things we never actually got to talk about. And now for me, it makes so much sense because you're such an advocate. Everywhere you've been, even knowing you after post Netflix, like you're such an advocate for it. So I'm glad you're okay.
Right? Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Brooklyn kids for the win.
Yeah. So that I have so many questions that I was writing down. But one of the things is, so how do you think about creativity and technology when it comes to kids, right? Especially nowadays when access is so vast
Yeah.
and like the challenges that you try to tackle are large and boundless because protecting kids and trying to navigate that space is tough. So how do you think about creativity when it comes to even tiers of kids?
Yeah. So the the thing with kids, right, they have huge amounts of access, and even the numbers, you just, let's take 8 to 12-year-old kids spend an average of 5 hours a day on screens outside of school. And I think 70% of those kids have their own device, and all of their schools are using devices, so their exposure to screen time is huge. And it's probably the largest extracurricular activity that any kid has in their childhood, and it's very largely unguided. Parents are really caught in this, they're caught in the status quo. They don't know, the guidance around how to navigate is fractured. So a lot of what I think about is really around three things. So one is just being mindful about technology use. And so knowing what's my purpose, what's my goal with using technology. And this is true if you're a kid, an adult, if you're, qualify for AARP, right? No matter your age, being mindful really matters. The second piece is active viewing. So same as you would read a book and tell stories and talk about what's happening, finding ways to do that with technology is also really critical to just continuing to help support kids to learn. The third piece, though, really specifically around creativity, though, is the mindset of technology as a tool, right? A lot of us, especially with social media, can feel like we're serving the technology rather than the technology is there to serve us. And we can feel very out of control with it. So this mindset of technology as a tool is almost, if you think about transportation, right? If I need to go to my friend's house, I decide, am I riding my bike? Am I driving a car? Am I flying? Depending on where they live. I have to think about this from a transportation and a tool perspective of what's the right tool for the job. Technology is the same thing. If I need information, I might go to DoorDash or Yelp or or go to Amazon and look at reviews. If I need to create something, I'm thinking about, like, which tools do I use? What's my goal? If I need to communicate with somebody, am I using email, text, FaceTime? Teaching kids that mindset is really great, and doing it through activities that are largely creative is a great way to learn that. So, like, one of my favorites is to make a dance challenge with your kid. We've all seen the bazillions of dance challenges all over social media. Doing that with a kid, and there's ways to do them. Like, my daughter and I just did one with a stuffed animal, because then she didn't have to be on screen. But it's, you hit digital production, you hit planning, you hit frustration and emotions, you hit privacy and safety of, like, where are you recording? Is your house number visible or something else? You create, then it's all of the pieces of creating the content. So you see that full cycle of creating together, and you're doing the activity together. So again, it's that active viewing, that mindfulness.
So this might be useful for others. So for you, with building these tools and building these experiences and curating this content, what's the biggest challenge? And what should people who want to get into this space, like someone who wants to build technology for kids, like what are the biggest challenges that you face?
The One of the biggest things is just, one, knowing the audience, right? There is developmental psychology at play. Kids are not just small adults. Yes, there are certain things that they are, good design is good design, right? From a UX perspective.
Mhm.
But then there are a lot of things about thinking about developmentally, how do you build for them? So even one of my favorites is storytelling and kids. So preschoolers don't understand flashbacks or fade to black for an advertisement. Those are learned behaviors. It's structures that you learn of what is storytelling, right? Learning once upon a time is the opening of a story, and learning the end is the our conventions of storytelling that kids have to learn. Same as they get older, learning some of the more nuanced, what motivates a character. Again, if you think about a 5-year-old who is still very egocentric and selfish, they're not going to understand that characters have different motivations going on. And so how the storytelling evolves over time. And then really fun is when you get into like where kids start to understand abstract thinking in the tween and teen years. I just went through this with my daughter. So she's 13 and we watched Arrival. And slight spoiler, there is an aspect of multidimensional time to it. And her brain broke to understand that there's like this concept of multiverse sort of thing, or nonlinear time. And it was such fun because it's a developmental stage of starting to understand these abstract concepts. So if you come in and you're creating and you don't understand these different ages and what they're developmentally able to understand, it can really hurt your product ultimately.
So as a creative or someone who wants to get either into content creation, experience creation, or product management or anything like that, do you advise like doing psychological study? Like how did you, I mean, you said it, you picked up a degree along the way,
Right. I
right?
don't recommend that.
Because, part of it is what we do on this podcast is expose the different careers and different things people can do. So, we've always known kids can be a little more tricky. I don't want to say difficult. It was a little more tricky because there's regulations, there's laws, there's
Yep.
all kinds of like policy around it. But so is that what you would tell somebody? What would you tell a young creative who's like, I want to make shows for kids. I want to build
Yeah.
experiences for kids. What would you tell them to
Yeah.
do to prepare themselves?
I do a lot of consulting around this and have been speaking at Game Developers Conference for 15 years about exactly this of developmental psychology and game design. Even actually wrote a book about game design for kids. That's all the developmental side of things. But the way, and there's several books out there like this, but the way that I generally recommend is actually going to parenting sites and understanding, oh, I want to work with a 4-year-old. There are plenty of sites that actually provide the developmental information of what are the stages of where a 4-year-old should be. And it's a great initial place to start to understand. And then from there, starting to do those basic research things of continuing to talk to kids. A lot of times it's like, I know 4-year-olds, I have a niece. And it's like, yeah, that's one 4-year-old, but the range of what is normal for a 4-year-old is huge. And so you need to understand that. And so it coupled that information coupled with research is a really great thing. And then if you get super into it, then go for the degree. But that's a long path.
Yeah. I don't even want to ask how long it took. So then this may get into a little bit of why you started Between, but first is what is your personal mission when it comes to the work that you do? So, you mentioned one of the experiences, like your thing that kind of the trauma that kind of pushed you into this and getting over that and wanting to be more of an advocate for kids. So what is your personal mission for creating all these things and all the things that you've done so far? Because yeah, your career has been primarily in the kid space.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who work in entertainment, our metric of success can often be like, did you watch more media today? Did you watch more TV today? Did you play more games today? And I've always tried to be in a place where there's a qualifier on that of like, did you play more good media today? Did you watch more good TV today? Has been the space that I want to feel good about, whether it's educational or entertaining. Just is it good content? That's expanded now, though, to also be how do families develop good media habits generally, like really a digital literacy, digital health perspective that's expanded out of my work now and has really become over the last year has become sort of the new mission or the evolved mission that I pursue.
So transition that into what was the impetus to start Between, and some of that for sure carries over into your startup, but tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So one is I've always known how much kids love their video and love their screen time, right? That's been abundantly clear throughout my career. And I've also seen how much stress and fear and anxiety and judgment parents feel about balancing their kids' desire for screen time with the reality of all the other activities, the reality of sometimes parents just need a break and they need to go make dinner, and screens are a convenient way to do that. But then there's, all these voices that are telling you you're a bad parent if you do that. And how do you navigate that? So those two have been givens. Quite frankly, I think parents felt that guilt even in the 80s when I was growing up. Like that's just been a factor of media. But the newer information is really that also the incumbents can't be trusted to give our kids safe experiences. And so over the last year or two, and I'd say Meta is the brunt of this, where there's been a lot around the lawsuits and the information that's come out, but where it's become clear, even if you take 13-year-olds in the last 7 days, and this is research from Meta, in the last 7 days, half of 13-year-olds will have seen something inappropriate on Instagram. And by age 13, more than half of kids have been exposed to pornography. And, 75% of kids have seen something inappropriate on YouTube. And parents are like terrified of this, not just of the inappropriate content, but also of just getting caught off guard. So whether it's a kid suddenly, seeing something online and asking a question, or gosh, even, the Olympics with the pole vaulter, right?
Right.
Like here you are sitting, watching the wholesome Olympics thinking, and all of a sudden you're having to explain, why are the commentators stammering? Why are they saying package instead of the actual anatomical word? And you're now like suddenly not prepared and you're having to explain this. We might want to put that video in or explain what actually happened. For those of you who don't know, if you didn't see this, in the Olympics, a pole vaulter was pole vaulting and his penis hit the pole and knocked it down, and he was disqualified, and it became a massive thing. And then even he was offered a deal with a adult website,
Right.
an adult website. Kids hear about that, and then you're explaining. So it's not just there's high risk of inappropriate content, but then there's also just the risk of you get into these conversations. And so all of these things come together, coupled with also then I was in a position last year where it was like, I'm ready to do a startup. I'd had a business before, but I'd never had a pure startup before. I was doing consulting and did some independent work on the side. And I was like, I want to take a crack at a startup. I want that do-over of now knowing what I know, what would happen. And so it became very clear that it was like, okay, let's make a safe space for kids. And so Between started as this question of how do we build safe social or a safe alternative to YouTube? All the fun of YouTube without the parental anxiety. How do we build that for kids? So that's where we started last year. And as you foreshadowed, which is another convention kids have to learn, there's pivots happening.
Yeah. So before we get into pivots, like I want to dive into that because there's some of that tension that you and I worked through, especially at Netflix and just in tech in general. And that's that tension of what is the right age? How do you age up? Right. And something that me and my wife and I were talking about, and there's a lot of parents that listen. So this is for those listening, this is a mix of creative, but also like real things that we're probably dealing with as parents. Is kids have, we talked about earlier, the access, and it seems like some kids are maturing much quicker because I think about myself in the 80s too. I'm like, I didn't see this stuff. I didn't have access to this stuff. I didn't want to be like 17, like 7 going on 17 or anything like
Yeah,
that. So how do you, and these tech companies are now pushing like, oh, I think you remember this test. We've put orange is the new black in the kids experience.
right.
Right. And so there were just things like that, right? Where technology is constantly pushing the boundaries.
Yeah,
So, what is your opinion on that? I know, I mean, that was something hotly debated for a long time,
right.
like things like that. So, what is your thought on that? And how is Between going to help parents get the right tools
Yeah.
to kind of combat that?
Well, the reality is there are parents who let their kids watch all sorts of things. I and this is where I get so many people when they find out what I do who ask, "What's too early? Is it okay if my kid is watching this?" I had a dad one day say to me, this was a couple years ago, he's like, "My 9-month-old plays World of Warcraft with me. Isn't that great?" And so I take the position that it is not my place to validate your choices. And that's not, and I say that with no judgment or shame or anything other than it is a personal decision. And how I think about it is my job is to help give you the information. Because I've heard of people letting their kids watch zombie apocalyptic shows because their kids wanted to know about zombies and they didn't know what else to show them. And so they showed them Walking Dead or something, right? And it's just, there's all sorts of decisions parents make. Instead, what I really want to make sure parents are armed with is the information to think through those decisions and that they're being mindful about those decisions. And so, thinking about, if especially like the question of when's too early, right, becomes it's a personal decision. There's a lot of reasons that parents will do this. Is it a balanced activity? There's lots of other things going on. You can think about it with food. Yes, I would love to eat chocolate all day long. I would be miserable and sick. If I only ate broccoli, I would also be miserable and sick, right? The danger lies in the extremes. Balance is the good place. And then the third piece is really this notion of making sure you're still being active around the viewing. So in the case of little kids need to hear words. And when screens are on, when televisions are on, conversation suppresses because attention's on the device. And so kids don't hear as many words. This is the danger of like background viewing in homes, is just kids are not hearing as many words. So for parents to then make those decisions and know, oh, we're going to let our kid watch a show, but then we're going to also talk with them. We're going to make sure we make up for that time and we talk with them. Or we're going to use technology for interactive things like FaceTime. A lot of kids' first screen time is actually a FaceTime experience with a grandparent. That's a more interactive environment, especially if the parent is sitting alongside the kid, helping to reinforce that. Then when you get up into older kids and you start to think about the different kinds of, so when do I introduce a phone? When do I introduce social media? When do I introduce Roblox, right? There's all of these moments. They're almost like birds and the bees conversations that just keep happening. There's so many of them. Is being able to think about, what do I want as a parent? So when my daughter got a cell phone, it's like, well, she needs communication. She needs to be able to reach me. She needs to be able to coordinate. Everything else on the phone is a privilege, right? I could just give her a smartphone, but everything else is a privilege that I will allow her to have, but she needs to show me responsibility for those things. We have a contract, we have expectations and agreements around what happens, including if she starts to slip on that responsibility, I'm going to take some of those privileges away. And the other piece, especially with kids who are older, is talking realistically with them about the dangers. And so helping them understand, like, text thread bullying is a big thing. And it happens in Google Docs too, where there'll be a group chat or a group doc, and then somebody will get bumped off of it. And then there's all this drama that ensues. And the kids like why'd you take me off? Put me back on. And all this stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And they're learning how to negotiate the social situation, but they need intervention. They need help and support from adults to help them understand there's negative impacts to this. And how do you actually resolve conflict? Not just, we live in a cancel culture, right? And it's like, this is not the way to do that. Same as talking about social media. Here's the actual risks, right? This is what we do. If you see something inappropriate, this is what you do about it. Right. Those conversations are hard and awkward. I mean, it is like puberty talks in many ways. But we need to have them as parents in order to arm our kids, because there are no surveillance tools that are 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Even, the attention that we're talking about, you can assume that YouTube's filter works appropriately, but like it filters for like the big things like violence and nudity, but it doesn't account for like aggressive behavior and stuff like that, right? So like even then it's important to still monitor, at least pay attention to what your kids are watching. And that's, you're right on. Like with our kids, with so much technology around, we're constantly like, this is why it's appropriate, this is why it's not appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. And then making sure that we're explaining what they're seeing and why it's not good behavior or why it is good behavior. Which brings me to the pivot, right? So now, I mean, you initially started for a tool for kids, but tell us a little bit about how you pivot and what was the reasoning behind it? Was the impetus behind that pivot?
Yep. So we still have the app for kids, so that it does still exist. And so we continue to support that. And there are kids who use it and love it. The best way I would describe my experience of building this app is we're operating in a giant all-you-can-eat candy store buffet, right? And that candy store buffet is YouTube and TikTok and, you know, all these sites with all this content. And I'm standing there handing out orange slices. And there are kids who absolutely love orange slices and are super excited to see that, but it is a small population. And unless I'm willing to like coat those orange slices in sugar and fake up the color and do all these essentially behavioral tactics and black box algorithm kind of things, it's going to be very, very difficult to compete. Meanwhile, though, all the parents are standing there going, oh my God, how do I navigate this? And I'm standing there with orange slices and they're like, you help us out here. And so, you know, the parallel of that is those conversations all along with Between, we've had resources for parents that have been part of really our go-to-market plan of how, you know, even the dance challenge that I talked about or the different foundation rules. It's been all of those materials. And as I, over the last couple of months, just looked at the growth data, looked at all the experiments we've run to try to figure out how do we grow. And with kids, this is one of the other things, the hardest thing about growth is that it's not just the parents, it's the parents and the kids. So this funnel is complicated and you can end up with a giant hole from the parent to the kid, where if the kid just doesn't want it or doesn't want to engage, it's really tricky. And so we were having that problem. And then I realized, though, the resources for parents is where my traction is, that there's a lot going on there. And then as I continue to play with this, and over the last 45 days, I've been messing around on TikTok. It's literally been me and my camera trying a whole bunch of like informed spaghetti at the wall, but like still a lot of spaghetti.
Right.
I've driven 115,000 views in 45 days, messing around kind of thing with this, like this content. So it's another proof point. So what I'm moving toward now is building, we'll continue to maintain the app, but Between is really becoming a resource for parents to navigate parenting in a digital world. So everything from those foundations of first devices, first screen time, first phone, to the active viewing and the engaging with technology as a tool in those activities, through to what do you do when tech goes sideways? We have workshops that we already do around what do you do when your kids see inappropriate content, if they're encountering bullying, if they're encountering, you know, pornography online. And so providing that full spectrum of support for parents in a very practical, meet them where they are of, yeah, no judgment. Screen time's going to happen. We're here to help make it the most successful screen time we possibly can.
Nice. More people should rewind that actually and go to the website, which will be linked in the show notes, to get these tools. One thing I want to ask too is you have a strong history of PM work, of product management work, but this might not come naturally to people. So what was it that made you pivot, and how do you know, like with somebody wanting to start their business, how do they know when to pivot, when to keep pushing, and when should you change the business model? Because it's easy to say like, no, this is what I want to build, and you know, you die on that hill, and unfortunately your business may too. Or saying like, well, my audience will tell me what the business is, and you can overcorrect in both ways. But for you, knowing your PM background and being a founder, how do you know when to make that pivot?
And I would say, even to the die on this hill, I am a consumer kids product person, right? Like pretty much my entire career has been about that, building entertainment for them. So to suddenly find myself moving into a place where it's like, oh, I'm really more parenting coach and parenting advice, support, guidance is just it's an existential shift of its own. But really it comes down to the art and the science of everything. Because like most things in life, there's not a clear answer. And what I think, especially working as a PM over the years, really helped me do was find the methods to get me the data. And then to find the comfort point, though, of I'm only going to get to 50, 60, 70% confidence, right? Basically, can I get more confidence than flipping a penny? It's like every product manager, that's what we have learned to do. We have trained ourselves to be slightly better than guessing, and some of us are better at it than others. But it comes down to understanding how to use the data, how to use the research, how to use your colleagues and peers as sounding boards so that you get to a point where you know you're making the best decision you could at the time with the data you had. And often it is a messy, icky, yucky process. Had you talked to me probably 4 weeks ago. I was in the thick of all of this. I'm not up in my office. You can't, my wall was covered with sticky notes, mapping all sorts of things. I have notes everywhere. I have spreadsheets and charts and breakdowns of all sorts of things because it was all going into the soup of deciding what's going on here. And it's a really uncomfortable process. And finally, I came out of the other side of it where it was like, oh, I think it's over here. And now I'm in the process of playing out those hypotheses. It's all the scientific method.
Right.
It's all like form a hypothesis, go test it, and then change it, kind of thing. But that makes it sound so simple and so straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, it's also data size, right? So like, the benefits of working in a big business, you can get statistical significance, right? But now when your traffic is maybe 1/100th of that, you're like, okay, so what is statistical significance
Right.
really? Maybe I'll go with directional
Yep.
because that's all
Or
I
you
can
end
get.
up or you end up doing all these other weird experiments, and it might be, like, literally talking to people, or it's like, I've been on Reddit, like, trying to categorize and look at that stuff. Some of the TikTok experiments I do are literally like, let me try different brand positioning.
Right.
I actually don't care about the views on some of those videos. I'm literally just looking for which one does better than the others. One of my favorite stories about like the art and science of data, Halo, the video game, used to release heat maps of their worlds and where like kill shots would happen. And there was this one particular map, and people would use it to study like how do they up their scores so that they I'm betraying, I one, don't remember a lot about Halo, but two, I also was not a huge player of it, but I loved this. They would release these maps, and there was this one map that looked like if you were a player, you were just going to get like everybody died on this level. And so, but if you wanted to up your scores and your performance, it was a great level to be on.
Hmm.
But it just looked miserable. And until you actually went in though and talked to players and studied the actual world, if you just looked at the data, it looked terrible. But if you went in and you talked to players and you studied it, it turned out where the characters would spawn into the world, there was this cliff. And if you could spawn into the world and get up onto the cliff, you could sit there and just pick off the characters as they, or
As they
the
spawn,
avatars
as they leave.
as they appeared. So you would like, and so some people loved it and it was like a feature, and other people got so frustrated with it, but you couldn't get that information until you had that blending of the quantitative and qualitative data.
Yeah. That's I was never a big Halo fan, but yeah, that's true. How many times have we seen data? And if you take this is why I coach people on data informed versus data driven, because if
Yeah.
you just go by the black and white data, you can do some dangerous things. When you start to dig into the data, you'll realize, oh, that data set is skewed by X, Y, and Z. Let me take what's good about this data and then make adjustments appropriately.
Yes.
Um, okay, so now I want to get a little bit into stepping a little back from between, and your life as a founder. So what has that been, moving from world of tech, creative, and entertainment now into like starting a startup? What are the happy surprises, and what have been the not so happy surprises in your
Yeah.
journey so far?
It is the most emotional roller coaster I've ever encountered. It's like the highs are so high and the lows are low, and they can literally be minutes apart. And so one minute I'll be like, "This is brilliant! It's amazing! I've unlocked it." The next one I'm like, "Oh my god, just call it! Just get on LinkedIn, update your resume, and go just start reaching out to recruiters." So it's humbling, it's infuriating, it's rewarding. I mean, it's kind of like parenting, quite frankly. But it's been such a neat experience. So I've done tons of 0 to 1 products. I'd say most of my career has been actually in that 0 to 1 space, but it's always been with established brands for the most part. There's been some indie projects, but it's like doing a 0 to 1 project with Sesame Street or Netflix is a very different experience than doing a 0 to 1 project as a solo founder.
Mhm.
So I would argue I've done like more like 0.5 to 1. I haven't really. So this is really truly the 0 to 0.5. And it is so much fun because I just love experimenting and playing, and let me try this, let me try that. And that's not for everybody, but it's been absolutely thrilling for me. And it's been a great opportunity to talk to all sorts of people and catch up and hear stories. And so I love it.
Yeah, that's I mean, I as you were talking, I'm like 100%, 100%, plus one, plus one, plus one, because there's days where it's like amazing and fantastic, and there's days where like, what am I doing? Like, should I? But it's those days when you question yourself that it's that much better when you work through it and you power through it, and the reason and the why is big enough.
Yeah.
Take it back to Simon Sinek, right? Like if your why is big enough, you'll continue to do anything.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
great phrase too of your belief being greater than your fear, right?
Absolutely.
That I love just that like conviction, right, is going to help you navigate.
Yeah. So this could be for you to your younger self or you to anyone out there who's wanting to get into this space. Like what advice would you give to your younger self or someone out there who's thinking about going down this career path?
I wish I studied behavioral psychology sooner. Now, knowing the amount of time I spent in school, I'm not sure where I would have fit that in, but there is so much, not only to just good product design, but especially to growth. And growth is so hard and so key, and especially now is so hard because you can't just buy your way to bazillions of users. Um, and behavioral psychology is such a key part of that. And understanding the difference between the bad behavioral psychology that gets us caught in doom scrolling loops and, sort of takes advantage of the lizard brain versus how to do evolved versions of behavioral tactics that really like are for good. Understanding how to navigate that, I just that's one, it's fascinating. Like the research there is just amazing, but also I feel like I probably could have gotten a jump on a number of things had I had that sooner.
Absolutely. Which brings me to, because that's a long time in school too. And it's still I can't fathom like picking up a degree. But that being said, this is your opportunity to call out anyone if you want. But the question for me is, what role, if any, did mentorship play for you or others you mentored? And if there's any mentors in your past that you'd like to mention or
Oh my gosh.
acknowledge.
They're so I don't even this is like the Oscars. You're gonna play me off with music. Um, uh-oh, did you lose me? Oh no. I'm gonna wait and see if this is my connection.
Are we there?
Oh,
Sorry.
yep. Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There there
Mentorship.
there's now probably like weird me going, "Rico, are you
No,
there?"
no, it's okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I was saying, yeah, this would be like the Oscars, and you'll be playing me off if I like try to actually like name everybody. But I will say, and this is why I do mentorship stuff now. There's been so many people who have been so incredibly gracious with their time that have, and even still with the startup that continue to should just be incredible resources. So I've always made sure as much as I can when people reach out, unless I'm just absolutely underwater, and even then I try to point them to people. I really try to make sure that I'm helping folks because it's impossible without being able to talk to folks. I get a lot of people who ask me, they're like, "Should I go to grad school?" And we'll talk through those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing in the mentorship played a big role for
Hmm.
getting to where you are. Yeah. And yeah, if people ask me who my mentors were, the list would be long, and I know I would forget and leave people off. Um, one more thing before we go
Yeah.
is there any book or any project? So I have this theory that I've been working with and love your thoughts on it, right? Because I think you can get too much into the self-help space where you feel like you're not good enough now, and now you're just like constantly in this self-help loop. So it doesn't have to be a book, it doesn't have to be some self-help thing. But if there was something, some activity, some book or something you'd recommend people to do to help them kind of navigate this stuff besides school and stuff like that, what would that be?
Yeah. It exists both as a book, but I will say improv comedy.
Hmm.
It's something that I started doing probably about 7 years ago. and I now teach it, and I teach it to folks who are professionals. Now here's the why of it. Improv is fundamentally about listening, and I will tend to play chess with people. So I will say I'm listening, but I'm trying to be 5 sentences ahead of you so that I can get there faster than you. And that's not actually listening. Listening is really being present with the person. You can see mindfulness shows up a lot in my life too, being present with the person. And improv forces you to do that because you literally have no idea where your partner is going to go next. And so all you can do is be present for them. So it's incredible for listening. It's incredible for team dynamics and support. And there's a great book, I pulled it out, Improv Wisdom, which is applying improv concepts to business settings. And it's not perfect. It's actually, the book's probably 20 years old at this point. So probably there's some like modern structures that it would need to be updated for. But it is hands down, and confidence and speaking, all of these different things. So now the students I have who come through, seeing them just grow in their ability not only to listen, but to communicate clearly, to be confident in what they're saying. It's it's vulnerable and scary, but it's a really neat tool.
Yeah, I did that with Second City
Second City.
once?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think and it was an offsite, and
Yeah.
we went and, like, they facilitated, like, an improv session with, like, yeah, exactly like that, and it had to it illustrated what you're talking about, active listening, but
Hmm.
also, like, how to work together as opposed to just, like, throwing things over the fence,
Yeah.
right? So that's fantastic, and I didn't know you did that. If somebody wanted to take this class, not saying they could request you, but if
Mhm.
they wanted to take something like this, like, where is it that you teach that, or where would you recommend they go?
Yeah, so one is just searching local improv and
Right.
finding a play and just going and asking them, because a lot of local groups will have. I perform through Comedy Sports San Jose, and Comedy Sports is actually a franchise location that exists in probably 25, 30 cities. Second City is a great resource. There's a fair number of places now that still do online improv. It's not quite the same,
Right.
uh, but it can be something that you get a taste of it. And I would say email me if it's something that somebody is looking for. I'm happy to field questions to try to help people find places, because it's really truly, it's been an incredible community, and it definitely made me a better leader.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I second that. It was such a great, if you're looking for listening and looking for team offsite ideas, this is a
Mhm.
really good one. Is one of my favorites.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, thank you, Carla. And don't forget, you can get to Carla at betweenbtwnd.com. That's also the URL for Between. So if you have any questions, they'll also be linked in the show notes. So you don't have to memorize it. If you're driving, don't stop and write it down. It'll be in the show notes. Click on it later. But thank you, Carla, for taking the time to chat
Thank you.
with us today. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Absolutely been a riot. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, that's it for another episode of Creative Leadership with Heart. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Creative Leadership with Heart. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. If you're ready to make huge, lasting change in your life, then what are you waiting for? What will your life look like if you took action today? What would it look like if you didn't? If you're serious and you're ready, book your free strategy session today, and let's make your future a reality.